I worked on a hot shot crew at the time for the Forest Service, so we spent 2 to 3 weeks out in remote areas. We covered a large amount of ground on foot, generally nowhere near trails or common backcountry traffic. We found weird stuff before, like stashes of guns, creepy old trapping cabins in the AK, and picture cabins of like horror movie-esque with rusty traps hanging from the ceilings, and even to shoot a bear once that had too much interest in our spike camp. We took a bear matters very seriously after a crew member was attacked by a bear in 2008 while performing a burnout operation. Well, one day, my buddy Greg and his saw partner were following the fire, cutting line. Suddenly, Greg noticed a pair of Carhartts half burned on the ground. "Oh, Carhartt," Redneck Greg said with enthusiasm, flopping chew spit out. Greg's saw partner knew something must be up when he noticed from a distance that Greg poured us out his chew and flicked it on the ground. Greg saved his chew for 2 use cycles of consumption, and his partner gave him that chew just before an hour. As Greg picked up the incredibly heavy pants, they still had legs and part of the vertebrae inside them. The upper half of the body was totally missing. Turns out, some poor guy got torn apart by a bear, and they found the rest of his body about a quarter mile away. Must have happened years ago because the remains were all bones. The Carhartts were completely intact. We thought it would be a great Carhartt commercial, though. I am a wildlife biologist and former wildland firefighter. I wouldn't say anything too strange, but definitely some very interesting encounters. I used to work on one of the largest wildlife refuges in the country, right on the Mexican border. So I ran into border crossers all the time. Most of the time, I would see them because they would flag me down because it was too hot and they were giving up. Sometimes I would just be thinking to trail cameras and I would hear a bunch of rustling when 10 or so people scatter in all directions. One time I brought the SD from the trail cam at the very remote water hole back to the office to check. The first pictures I saw of me installing the card were maybe 5 minutes later a group of about 10 guys, all carrying 50 or so pound packs filled with weed and guns, come into the water. I'm sure they were just watching me and waiting for me to leave, and I knew the stuff happened a lot. And I know with lookouts and why it's probably happened to more than I know, but it was still kind of eerie. A similar thing happened on a trail cam in South Africa with a leopard. I walked by it, and he walked by the opposite direction, coming out from where I was walking towards. About 1 minute later, he obviously heard me coming, stepped to the side in the bush, and waited for me to pass, with me none the wiser. Another time in South Africa, I was half dozing off in the forest and heard something next to me. I was researching some Mongo monkeys and, at the time, following a troop, so I figured it was one of them. I looked over and there was a honey badger about 3 feet from my face staring at me. I kind of made a quick small movement. He made a very surprised face and ran the opposite direction. I wouldn't say any of these were strange as much as cool, but they were interesting and pretty creepy at the time. I am a seasonal ranger for my local forest district. Despite the fact I live in a fairly suburban area, the forest preserves still make up 12% of the county, with much of the property being heavily wooded. Not far out wilderness, but pretty secluded in some areas. Being a seasonal employee, I have been on the job for a bit over a month now, but in my short time there, I have found quite a few things. 1. A dead man in a tree. The rest of the rangers say they find out about one suicide a year, so there was the one for the year. When we go around opening parks each day, we drive through to make sure everything is okay. In this instance, I was driving through and had just lost sight of the road when I saw a man hanging from a tree in the clearing. He had hung himself. I called the cops and the coroner. Friggin' coroner took about an hour to show up, and he was only one with a ladder long enough to cut the guy down. So I stared at the dead guy in a tree for about an hour. 2. Crazed, a drugged-up naked man running around a parking lot took me and 3 other rangers to catch the damn guy. When we finally caught him and found out he had multiple cuts across his body from running through brush and rocks lodged firmly up his ass. In 3, the headless deer. Normally, when a pack of coyotes takes down a deer, yes, they have a bunch of coyotes around here, they leave bite marks all over the body along with torn flesh everywhere. But the head was cleanly sliced off and placed directly next to the body, meaning this is something created by human intervention. We still haven't figured out what that's about yet. And I've only been here for 5 weeks. Ranger stories. I'm a park ranger. Another ranger and I were out on a search and rescue call once. The missing person was a man in his 20s. He had gone hiking and had not returned the day that he intended to. When we got the call, it was nighttime, but we hiked in a few miles and set up camp on a ridge that was in pretty good view. He had gone to the woods prepared, so we decided to wait until daylight before beginning the search. About 2 a.m., I get up and am taking a piss when I see a moving light at the base of the cliffs across the valley and a few miles away. It looks like a flashlight beam. I tell the other ranger and we make the decision to keep waiting for daylight. The next morning, we decide to go check out the area and bring this guy home. We get approximately to where I saw the light from the night before and start calling his name. Soon, we find his body at the base of the cliff. He had fallen 60 feet on his head. The body was badly mangled. We radio back that it was now become a recovery instead of a rescue. At this point, the other ranger yells and tells me to come look at this. Lying 20 feet from the man's body was his mag light. It seemed odd, but I thought nothing of it until the other ranger reminded me of the light the night before. It kind of gave me creeps, but I still dismissed it. Before too long, the coroner arrived and inspected the body. After he took the body back to the lab, he said that the man had been dead for at least 48 hours before we found the body. All of a sudden, the oh shit alarm went off in my brain. I knew that it couldn't be possible. I had the coroner review his work with the same results. I tried to find an explanation for the light that I had seen, perhaps to the hikers, but one search and rescue guy had stayed at the trailhead in the entire night and no one had come or gone. To this day, I have no clue what I saw that night, but it freaked me out. My brother Jay was a part of the orienteering team in high school. It really helped him get ready for being a state park ranger. For those of you who don't know, orienteering is when they put you in the middle of nowhere in teams of 2. Give you a map and a compass, and you must find your way to each check-in station in order, and it's a race. So, my brother and his partner set out, make it through the first few checkpoints, and are feeling pretty solid. But they don't make it to the next one when they think they're supposed to. They double check the map, do some math, and figure out that they miscalculated some angle or another and are lost at the edge of the map. They recalculate and set off in a new direction. Keep in mind this line was never intended to be part of the orienteering run. This is unexplored territory. And they came across what my brother said could only be described as a crater, a deep bowl in the forest, devoid of trees. At the center of it was an ambulance. They were in the woods, miles upon miles from any roads, and there is an ambulance that looks like it's decades old sitting in a crater. So being teenage boys, they go to investigate it. Fuck the race. My brother said that the forest was well on its way to reclaiming the vehicle, and that it was just rusted and covered in paint plant life. It looked out of date, like it came from the 40s or some bygone era. In the back, the gurney was still there, but bent in the middle, like something had smashed it. There were brown smears on the walls that could have been rust or dirt or blood. They both got a horrible feeling from the place and took off out of there. My brother thinks he could probably find it again, but flat out refuses to. So, who knows what happened in that crater in the middle of the woods in that ambulance? I'm a park ranger, and I like to hunt. And when I say I hunt, I don't mean I sit in a tree stand. I mean I'm the guy out hunting by walking over the entire park with enough on my back to let me sleep at night sort of comfortably by little enough that I won't mind dragging 150 pounds of yummy out of the woods. Alright, so I'm hunting a fairly large forest somewhere in the northeast corridor of the US. It's not uncommon to run into people on the edges of the woods. It's fairly uncommon to run into people in the middle of the woods, even during hunting season, unless you're on the trails, which I wasn't. And it's decently common to run into the ruins of buildings from the 1800s. I happened to be hunting a new valley that I was pretty sure had a crossing in it. To set the view, I'm sitting on top of a steep shale slide, looking down into a valley with a creek running through it. Approaching this plateau, there's a knife edge that runs up and down the ridge, but there's really no way to get up to that spot except if you're seriously determined, drunk, or foolish. Getting up here creates quite a bit of noise from the stones sliding on the stones, which means I know I need to sit up for an hour to let things settle down before I make the descent. Since it's such a pain in the ass, I left my day pack at the bottom under a pine tree and only had a rifle, binoculars, water, and an energy bar. I'm up here for about 3 hours glassing this little piss of a stream, looking for something to cross it, seeing nothing but squirrels and birds, and I finally decide to start glassing the opposite hill of sheer boredom. I am 90% sure I chose a poor spot and wasted an afternoon looking at nothing. Such is hunting. It's got really interesting days and it's got really boring days, and that's why it's called hunting and not shooting. As I'm screwing around with the focus of the binoculars, I catch a glimpse of something which almost looked like a person, if they were wearing dark blue clothes and about 4 feet tall. 99% of the time, the day hiker just passed by without realizing I'm here, even with the blaze orange requirements. Or they pretend to ignore me, but you'd be amazed how many times someone has almost walked through my stand. Anyways, this person wasn't moving, which started to make me think I was wrong. It was just standing there, behind the cover of some low scrub brush and tree branches, and I would have missed it if it were not for the color. I zoom out a bit and realize that I'm not looking at a person, but it's actually a collapsed cabin. I was looking at where the door would be, except it really did look like a person, and cabins aren't blue. I move the zoom back to the door and play the focus for about 5 minutes, and I can't get the person to come back. In fact, the cabin door now has some light from the setting sun visible through the holes in the walls and roof. Whatever 4-foot-tall thing I was looking at has moved. Teenager's right. I have that thought and then realize something else. I still can hear birds and squirrels and all the other things in the woods which typically would go quiet when they notice something. Which means that they didn't notice me. But that also means that they didn't notice whatever was in the cabin door a short time ago. I'm doing my best to stay quiet and not move, and whatever it was certainly did move. I would expect everything in the woods to have gone for cover with a teenager crashing to the brush. But the noises almost made it worse. There was stuff moving in the brush, but the problem was, the stuff was moving around in the brush. I started to think that it was a trick of the light since the sun was setting. And it was getting to that part of the day when tree stumps look like deer. I knew I'd have to move soon and figured it might as well pack up because I still had to get down to the shale and get back to the pine tree where I planned to throw a tarp and sleep. At this time, I realized it was a dark per se, but it was overcast now. Again, the creepy experience isn't that there's something obviously wrong, it's that everything is so completely normal that I would expect that I was alone. About this time, a fog rolled into the valley, which the combination of overcast, weather conditions, sunset, and a ground fog coming up into the wet, low valley has signaled that it was time to leave. I checked my safety, put the caps on my glass, and reached up to take down my orange flag. The moment I grabbed the flag, the dread came. That's the only way to describe it. The woods went from animals going home to sleep to full-on you're fucked. The movement had attracted what I could only describe as 1,000 invisible eyes which all turned in unison as they noticed me. Ever wonder what a deer feels like in the headlights? This definitely has to be us. Then I heard the children. I heard children laughing. Not teenagers, not adults, not women, but full-on 5-year-old kids laughing like they caught a firefly. I had hiked in 5 miles the previous day, through woods and put down more today. When I woke up and got to the spot, I distinctly heard children laughing during what I could only describe as the most creepy moment I have ever had in a valley. I know it's completely unoccupied, having stared at it for at least 4 hours or so. I am pretty sure my feet only touched the shale 3 times getting down the knife's edge, and I made a ton of log noises doing it too. At this point, I didn't really care. I grabbed the pack and my flashlight and absolutely full-on fucking ran to the next hilltop. I killed my light halfway up the hill, and then went to the top of the hill, where I threw down the tarp and unrolled my phone. And there I sat all night watching the hill I just came from. About a year ago, I started dating someone who worked as a state park ranger who I'll call Jay. Jay lived on the state park property in a 2-bedroom house tucked into the woods. We set the alarm and settled into bed around midnight with Jay's 2 dogs between us, and a third dog crated beside the bed. For some reason, I couldn't fall asleep, so I lay down listening to the dogs snoring and the deafening silence surrounding us while Jay slept. And then it started. A repetitive bouncing sound of some sort was coming from outside the window, less than a few feet from where I was laying on the bed, as if someone were dribbling a basketball on cement. The pace would speed up and slow down. The sound would become louder and softer. This continued for well over 2 hours. I wholeheartedly wanted to believe that I was hearing what were simply sounds of nature, so I ignored it. Next came the creaks in the walls. I know that houses make sounds, but this was unlike anything I have ever heard before. These sounds started in the hallway as very faint creaks. The creaks became louder as they reached Jay's bedroom, and what happened on the wall at the same time as going counterclockwise around the room until eventually it reached the wall beside me. The creak in the wall beside me was so loud that I jumped and the 2 dogs jolted from their sleep, and all the while I'm still hearing the bouncing ball outside the window and getting more nervous by the minute. And then at 3 a.m., I hear it. I hear the most ungodly, terrifying growl shrieking from the center of the house. It was so loud that Jay flies off the bed, grabs a shotgun hanging on the wall adjacent from the bed and shouts, "Is somebody in the house?" and takes off down the hallway towards the sound. The dogs are going berserk and I'm in tears, absolutely beside myself, pleading with Jay that it was not a person. Jay comes back into the bedroom after not finding an intruder or anything of the sort and says it must have been the dogs. I tell him it certainly was not the dogs, as I was awake the entire night. The dogs were asleep in the room with us. Maybe an animal got caught underneath the house. Yeah, maybe, I say. Somehow, after I've calmed down a bit, I drift off to sleep. The next thing I know, Jay is on top of me with his hands around my throat, and with the meanest look on his face, jerking my head back and forth, suffocating me and hurting me. I can't make any sound and I'm struggling to push Jay away, and that's when I wake up. It was all a vivid dream. Jay's asleep beside me. In the morning, we walk into the den and find a heater turned on full blast. It was the middle of summer. Jay only uses it during the winter months because the original furnace was quite tricky and was pre-broken. I'm convinced something in that house did not want me there. That growl will forever haunt me. I am a wildland firefighter with the Forest Service. This is not my story, but from an old supervisor of mine that I believe completely. The setting is 2004 or so, Hell's Canyon area of Middle Idaho. His crew had been working all day on an emerging incident and were going to be working through the night as well. Being the assistant superintendent of the crew, second in charge effectively, he was out ahead, scouting on an ATV or some such. He was working his way down a logging road that clearly had not been used some time, when a bobcat, or lynx, it's been a few years since I've heard it, appears in the middle of the road, but doesn't run away as they usually would. This thing stands there for a good 10 seconds, screams at him, and scampers up a tree, not 5 feet off the road. He finds this odd, but not particularly unsettling. Just a half mile or so down the road, he finds a small cabin. Also odd, as this is federal land and no private structure should be there. Upon investigation, all the windows had been boarded, shut tight, and someone had done a pretty good job of doing so. The door now had been punched out and secured to a hole drilled into a log frame by a chain. Someone did not want anything getting in or out for that matter. Peering through the hole in the door, he can see that everything in the house is upset. This has him kind of unsettled, so he hops on his ATV and heads back up the road. Well, here's where it gets real interesting. Right where the bobcat had been, there stands a Native American woman in a badly tattered nightgown and bare feet, just standing there. He yells at her, asking if she needs help. She just screamed at him, the same scream as the bobcat from before, and climbs up the tree faster than a human has a right to be climbing. Obviously, he nopes out of there as fast as he can, unsure of who or what he just saw. He asks a local guy about the cabin. After asking around a little, a local Native American hears them talking and informs them about what they saw. They said he saw a pumawa. Excuse the likely butchered spelling, in effect of skin changer or a warg. Now, I do not believe most people that tried to tell me that, but this was a serious man that did not fuck around about many things, so he was dead serious the 2 times that I heard him tell it, and I 100% believe that he saw what he thinks he saw. A few years ago, my friend Tez and I set out on a great American road trip. We were going to drive from New York to Los Angeles, zigzagging through the country for 6 weeks. We were both in our early 20s, pretty broke, and as my mom had been a long-haul trucker, I suggested that we save a ton of money and we should sleep in the back of our hatchback. It was a pretty cozy setup. We bought some blankets and sheets at Goodwill and cut them up to make curtains. By the end of the first week, we had gotten a set-up camp in about 10 minutes. We had our luggage moved to the front, curtains up, bedding laid down, and out for the night. We slept in parking lots, free camping sites, rest areas, and basically anywhere seemed safe and semi-legal. There was never a night after the first night where we felt scared, until the last week on the trip in Arizona. We were near Flagstaff and I'd gotten pretty used to our routine. We didn't go out on a set schedule and never worked or drive more than 3 or 4 hours a day. No destination really in mind, outside of a few must-see landmarks. We drive to places we found at night before on Google and take suggestions from other campers, locals, and people we met. We'd also gotten very good at making friends. We went to Denny's with a group of rednecks and met a campsite. In the back of their pickup, because I got hungry and overheard them saying they were going to go, we met an 80-year-old cowboy who took us out to drinking and taught us to line dance at a country bar. We played the guitar with some musicians in the middle of a thunderstorm, got fed breakfast and dinner by tons of campers who invited us to hang out with them, and spent the 4th of July with a family who basically adopted us into their campsite. Basically, every encounter we had with a stranger was a positive one. This night didn't look to be any different. We found a free campsite in Google and drove up into the woods, following our GPS. We were pretty far out of town, and something seemed a little bit off when we pulled up to our campsite. There was one RV parked and 2 cars further up in the trees. We pulled up near the RV and a man opened the door. Taz waved hello, he just stared at her. His expression was completely blank. Then, as if he hadn't said anything, he just slowly closed the door again and staring at us through the window. I was figuring he just wanted some privacy and he thought we'd be obnoxious. We poured farther down the road and found a flat spot to park the car. Instead of our usual routine of setting up camp immediately while there was still light out, we goofed around for a little bit, smoking and laughing and taking dumb photos of ourselves. Tez pointed out that a campfire farther down the campsite and we decided to go be friendly. We'd met so many cool people in the previous 5 weeks by just going up and offering beer or just chatting, so we wandered over. Near the campfire were 2 men, the owners of the cars we'd seen earlier. They seemed friendly and we sat down and chatted with them. They were drinking and smoking, so we sat down and had a beer with them. One of the men seemed pretty off, and We came to find out that two of them didn't actually know one another. The older man was definitely on some sort of drugs. He was spinning in circles and talking about UFOs, and however, they seemed harmless. This left us chatting with the younger man who claimed to be a former park ranger. He was handsome and easygoing, and we spent several hours just chatting about our trip, families, and everything. Then he started talking about the bear. He'd seen a bear earlier in the forest. Tez didn't believe him, and he pulled out his camera to show her some photos of the bear. It was very close to the campsite, and we both were a little freaked out. It wasn't unheard of for one of us to get up and go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, so the idea of a bear hanging around in the night spooked us. The ranger just laughed, and then his expression changed completely. It's hard to describe, but his voice seemed somehow cold. He said, "If you get out of your car in the middle of the night, it's not a bear you should be worried about." I kept waiting for the laugh and for him to nudge Ted's with his elbow. Joke's on the foreigner, and they say the city girl, right? He never did. I laughed awkwardly and made a dumb joke about serial killers in the woods. My friend laughed as well and joked about Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We moved to another subject. Within 5 minutes, the ranger had come back to it and was talking about something grabbing us from our car in the middle of the night. No matter how we tried to steer the conversation away from serial killers, he kept latching back on. The older man was high as a kite at this point and was staring at the stars, not talking. We'd just awkwardly laugh and sip our beer and try to get the conversation going somewhere else. Then, the ranger stood up and walked towards the cooler to get another beer. At this point, it was pitch black out, and I can't see anything outside the circle of light from the campfire. The beer cooler was outside the circle. Suddenly, there's a red dark in the darkness, and it took a moment for me to realize that it's a camera. The ranger's holding a camera. He had taken a photo of us. I could see the screen on the digital camera light up. Now, it wasn't very old for people that we met to take pictures with us. My friend has this gorgeous dark hair, blue eyes, with like a young Megan Fox, and we were pretty friendly. People like having pictures of themselves, too. It was an extremely strange thing to have this person taking pictures of us without asking or even indicating that that's what he was doing. We were both staring at him like deer in headlights at this point, but instead of realizing what he was doing is a bit weird, he checks his camera, adjusts some things, and takes another photo. This time with the flash, not asking us to smile or proposing a group photo, and no explanation. After this photo, he comes back and sits down by the fire. Not a word said about the photo. At this point, me and Tez are mutually freaked out. We make some BS excuse that we need to go set up our campsite and nope the hell out. When we stand to leave, the UFO guy smiles and says, "Have a good night." Ranger, however, looks at us and smiles and doesn't reach to anything, and she just says, "Be careful out there. There's more than bears in the woods." Every hair on the body stood on end. I wasn't alone in my discomfort either, because Tez laughed a response out and pulled me away from the campfire towards our car. We rushed back to the car, which we only found in the dark by referencing the RV, and jump in the front seats. My friend Tez is all about hyperventilating. Why did he take pictures of us? I was shaking. I responded, I read the serial killers sometimes warn their victims. She stared at me for a second and locked the car doors. Do you think he just took victim photos of us? We both freak out. She's in full panic mode, turns on the headlights of the car, and I immediately yell her to turn them off because now he knows exactly where our car is. God knows why, but that's the only night we used not to set up our camp. We didn't need to tear anything down, so we just got out of there as soon as light came. As we got into the dirt road, the ranger was walking towards our car, and with that same cold expression. So I hope I never meet that ranger again. The summer after I graduated, I spent a month working with a nonprofit that took inner city high school teenagers aged 15 to 17 backpacking in a national forest for a week at a time. Most of these kids have never been hiking, much less backpacking. I had 2 girls on the second week say that they planned on not sweating because it is gross. I told them good luck on that. Going into our last week out, my partner and I are feeling great. We were getting pretty sick of the food, but we knew what to expect from 20 teenagers at a time, and most of the students were really having a great and enjoyable time. The first day of the last week, my partner accidentally kept the van keys that the lead the guide needed, so we had to go down and meet them and give them back while I stayed with the 20 students. Half an hour later, I get a radio message saying that I need to come to the group to the site immediately. I put my group's student guide in charge and then tell them not to move from that spot for any reason. I ran all the way to the site and find a student laying on the ground next to a small lake. One of the guides puking in the water while trying to talk to the emergency satellite phone, and my partner conducting CPR on the student. While my partner was meeting one of the guides from the other group to exchange the keys, the students decided to go swimming. One of the boys panicked while swimming out to the rock and started drowning. The other students decided to leave without saying anything. Their other guide and EMT swam out to save him, but the student was panicking so much that he started climbing out on the guide and almost drowned him. That's when the guide was puking in the lake. EMT had to swim away. Then, another student that was recently certified as a lifeguard tried to save him, but was also put under and had to get away. By the time the lead guide returned, the drowning student was completely submerged and no longer responding. The lead guy swam out to him and pulled him out from the lake, but my partner ran back. He had heard screaming and shouting and knew there was a problem. He told a student to radio me. Right before I got there, his heart had recently resumed beating from CPR, and he started to breathe on his own. I monitored his breathing while talking to the emergency personnel. Once the emergency helicopter landed, I ran out to meet them and escorted them to the student. They hooked him up with an IV and carried him out. I ran back to my group and escorted them back to the bus pickup location without being able to tell them what had happened. They were understandably upset for having their trip cut very short and having to sit in the same spot for 2 hours. I let them open all the boxes of cookies and whatever other food they wanted to eat and brought them for the whole trip. My team, my other 2 guides, my owner, and myself went back out a week later to recreate the timeline of events for the lawyer's insurance. On the way out of the forest, the owner of the company got 2 flat tires, and 3 of us had to stay the night in a random motel, then rent a car out the next day to drive back to the city, since we couldn't all fit in the tow truck. The student survived. He wound up staying in ICU for over a month in medical-induced coma to heal his lungs, but amazingly survived. I never saw him again, and we were not allowed to contact him. I hope he is okay.